Today is January 18th, 2007. I'm Charles Lundquist. We're doing another oral history interview for the archives here at the University of Alabama. Our interviewee this morning is Ann Whitaker. Ann, delighted to have you here.
I'm glad to be here.
We'd like to start out by asking you to tell a little bit about where you spent your youth, where you were educated, and how you got into the space program.
All right. I was born and raised around Plainville, Georgia. My folks had a farm there, and we did farming of various sorts. My parents always encouraged us to become educated, and so when I graduated from Calhoun High School, I went to Berry College in Rome, Georgia. That was a school, it is a school where you can work most of your way through it. And I'd had a number of cousins that went to school there also. And I met my future husband there.
Yeah, for the historical record, maybe we should get your maiden name.
Ann Fight. That's an Anglicized German word.
Okay, go ahead.
We both majored in physics at Berry College. It was a time after Sputnik, and everybody was interested in joining the space race, and it was kind of like equivalent of war, and so you wanted to do what you could, and that seemed to be the thing to do at that time. After graduating from Berry, I had a fellowship at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa, and my husband had a teaching fellowship there, so we went down there. We weren't married at the time, and then I had a friend that lived in Huntsville, and I had gone to undergraduate school with her, and she happened to be down there working on an advanced degree also, and she said one week in the spring, "Let's go to Huntsville and interview for a job. They're hiring a lot of people." And I said, "Oh, good, space program, I'm for that." And so we came up here and interviewed, and then that spring or that summer we got a job offer. So I took mine.
What year would that be?
That was 1963. So I came to work at Marshall in June of 1963. My husband also got a job with Brown Engineering, and later that year we were married. So I have spent almost all my career in Huntsville, Alabama, working for the Marshall Space Flight Center, with the exception of a few months in Washington, D.C. But I'm still with NASA at that point.
Well, when you joined NASA, what organization did you go into?
Well, I went into propulsion and vehicle engineering in the materials aspect of that, and my division chief was Dr. William Lucas, and my branch chief was Jim Kingsbury. And,
those are familiar names.
Exactly.
We've had interviews with both of them.
Oh, have you? And it was a pretty exciting time. There was a lot of work going on of various kinds, and the particular group that I worked in was lubrication and surface physics, and the folks in that branch, including my supervisor, were all physicists. So we solved a lot of our problems using first principles, and it was just a great learning experience, and I loved it.
It's always good when you can solve something by using first principle.
Exactly, rather than push a button.
Yeah, that's... Well, what happened next then in your career?
Well, let's see.
What were the exciting programs that were going on at that time?
Well, of course, they were working on Saturn at that point, but, you know, I had my nose down to the grindstone in the lab, so it was hard to get a big picture view of things. I do know that we had a lot of dignitaries that came into the labs. We had one of the things that we worked on were the biomeds for Skylab also during this time, and we had Dr. Christian Bernard, the heart surgeon from South Africa, come through to see our biomedical equipment. We had Lady Bird Johnson come through, and just, you know, a number of folks like that. I think one of them was the actor who played Johnny Gleason's partner, Norton,
Oh, really?
on his show. And I spent about an hour talking to him about the space program. He certainly wasn't a Norton at that point or during that discussion. But we developed biomedical technology for Skylab. Even before that time, though, let me back up a little bit. We would occasionally see Dr. Von Braun, early on. He would be walking through the labs. He would poke his head in just to see what was going on.
He practiced management by walking around.
Exactly, yeah.
Very interesting way to do management.
Yes, right. And so we spent a lot of time doing the biomeds. I worked with Bob Swinghammer at that point in time, and which was experience in itself.
I'm sure that was.
I'll have to relate a funny incident.
Oh, please do.
Of course, I like to remind Bob of it. He likes to forget about it, I think. But we were, at the same time we were building and designing hardware, we also had to supply all the documentation for these experiments. So, and that really aggravated us because we wanted to get the hardware built. But we were putting the documentation together for a big review, and they had the guys at JSC kept hounding us about it. Glenn Looney was, I guess, Swinghammer's counterpart down there on the program, and Bob told us, leave out the 17 most important pages in the middle of this thing, and we did. And of course we delivered those boxes of documentation with those pages missing. And then a month later we had another meeting with them, and Bob said, you didn't read it, because the guts of the thing were no 17 pages. So that really came to an interesting point. But he was always doing clever things like that, and so I enjoyed it. I worked for him 17 years directly under him, and then later on I worked with him also as he moved up in the organization. So he's one of the memorable people.
Yeah, well, with time, Lucas and Kingsbury and Swinghammer moved up, and you moved up. What happened next in the chain of events?
Well, I have to say, I don't think I ever asked for a job, but it was always put to me like, well, you're going to have to work for so-and-so if you don't take this job. And so I would say, okay, I'll do that. Although I think my first love was really working with the hardware, but I did become a branch chief. That was in the 70s at some point. I don't remember precisely, but
what was the name of the branch?
It was the physical sciences branch, where we did a lot of optics testing and contamination and things of that nature. And then later on I became the deputy of the engineering physics division, and then my supervisor, Ray Galls, left or retired, and so I received his job. And
so what was the name of that division?
That was Engineering Physics Division.
Engineering and Physics, okay, yes.
So it was a branch of about 50 people. It had 50 civil servants. I don't know that we had very many contractors at that point in time. But we did non-destructive evaluation and contamination, lubrication and surface physics, and all of those kind of things related to materials and processes. At that point, I really enjoyed myself as the chief of that division, but I realized I was still in the mode of trying to see what's going on with hardware, and with that many projects and an organization growing like that, you can't do that. And I realized that, so I had to sort of change the way I did things.
It's hard to be hands-on when you've got a big organization. Right.
I mean, you become a bottleneck. So anyway, I changed the way I did things. From that point, I guess we were going into, that was like 1988 or 89 in there. In 92, the center was undergoing a reorganization, and I was asked to start the reorganization process of materials and process by taking another division, which was
I
a
guess
project.
the 1980s, of course, was the shuttle
That's right.
period, and you were no doubt involved in that.
Oh yes, just you name it, we were involved in. As a matter of fact, one of the things that we worked on back in those days were the Tethered Satellite. We understood that the tether body was not conductive enough to do its mission, so Sid Socher had asked us what could we do about that. Well, we developed a new paint and qualified it and put it on the hardware in 11 days. And that had most of the laboratory, at least had 150 people working 24 hours a day for 11 days. And we did the gamut of investigations required.
What was the nature of the paint, or what qualities did it have to have?
Well, it had to be very conductive, and the one that they started out with was not conductive enough. And of course, it was later on in the program when they realized that it wasn't conductive enough. So we did that. That was a very memorable kind of thing, and I ran that particular exercise. But later on, I was asked, as I mentioned, to take part in the reorganization by moving to another division that was project and environmental engineering. So we had lead engineers in the laboratory for each of the...
What was the lab called at that point?
Well, the lab is still materials and processing.
Still material and processing.
But this was another division.
Another division.
Yeah,
all right.
so it handled the projects and assigned lead engineers to the project offices and worked that way. I guess I did that reluctantly because I wasn't accustomed to that, but I guess they wanted to expand my knowledge base or something. But anyway, I took it, and of course I got to meet a lot of different people working different modes, I'd say. And then I decided to try for the SES program. So I was one of the first people that applied for that and was selected and went to headquarters. And there I worked with the chief engineer. Which
you were attached to the chief engineer's office?
And also with Code M, right. So I worked with Dan Mulville and some of those people, and particularly a lot of the guys in the shuttle office. It was interesting. I also spent some time in S&MA in headquarters, and there were a lot of people there, and they didn't have very many places to sit, so they would say, well, so-and-so's going on TDY for 2 weeks, you move over and sit at his desk.
Oh,
and I got to sit in legislative affairs for a while, which was eye-opening in itself. So I enjoyed that. Anyway, I came back to Marshall, and...
How long were you in Washington?
5 months.
5 months.
Right. So the coldest winter I think they've had in ages, and I went up there without earmuffs, but anyway, I eventually got something to cover my ears with. When I came back, I decided to, or I didn't decide, since I had my SES, I guess you call it certification, I decided to apply for one of the job openings, and that was the deputy in the Space Sciences Laboratory under Greg Wilson. So
yes.
I was selected for that job, and I really enjoyed that. Of course, I had known a lot of the scientists prior to that time, and it was just a good job. And then from that point on, I stayed in that job 2 years, and the Materials and Processes Laboratory position became open, and I let it be known I was interested in that, so I spent most of my career there, and I was selected for that job and just thoroughly enjoyed it. I think that's the best job I've ever had. And I was in that 3 years, and then Art Stevenson, at that time Frank Rose was the science had become a directorate at that point. So Frank Rose was the person selected for that, and he was interested in me coming there because I had known him before. As a matter of fact, I had suggested after I left the space science job.
He was from Auburn, wasn't he?
Right. He's the head of the Power Institute at Auburn, and I suggested to him that he try for that job because I think he was interested in completing his half 3. He had been a government employee prior to that time at some point in his career. So I accepted that job, and then Frank left about a year later, so I became the directorate head. And thoroughly.
What was the directorate called at that point?
It was, it might have been the Science Directorate. It did change names several times, Science and Technology, but it was always basically the same. It had the program offices as part of it also.
It had more than just the space sciences lab.
Oh yes, it had the Earth science, space science, microgravity science, and the programs. So at that point, I had about 40 years on the job. So they were looking for someone to serve as the interim director for NSSTC, and I was willing to take that job, and did that for 7 or 8 months, I think. And then I retired after that.
At some point in your career, you became interested in the astronaut corps.
Oh, that.
Like to tell us about that?
That's true. Back in about 75, that was when I was working in the engineering physics division. Several of my friends, Carolyn Griner, Mary Helen Johnston, and Doris Chandler, participated in a concept verification test of a material science payload. So we were able to put the payload together, actually got the equipment in and did that, and ran a simulation for about 5 days, and it got a lot of publicity, which is a little surprise to me, but anyway, it was an interesting experience. And then later on, still while I'm a member of engineering physics, we had an experiment on Skylab, Skylab, and or Space Lab rather. I'll get it straight in a minute. The first Space Lab, and they were selecting the payload specialists for that, and my name was put in the hat, and I was one of the 6 finalists for that. So that was a pretty interesting experience in itself.
What was the experiment?
It was a lubrication experiment. It was a roller bearing experiment plus a spreading and wetting experience. We had all that experience in lubrication and surface physics.
Any exciting results from it?
Well, we got to see boundary layers and things like that because it was much easier. We worked with Dr. Coda Pan at Columbia University at that point. But I was so interested in the other things that I was doing that I didn't pursue the astronaut thing. I just liked the laboratory work, and I'm not too good at repetitive kind of things.
Who ended up being the payload specialist on that mission? Do you remember? Not important. If you
I think it's Brian Lichtenberg.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, and I can't remember the other fellow's name, but I remember what he looked like.
All right, it's not important.
Yeah. So, over the years we had a lot of really good experiences.
What do you consider to be the 1 or 2 real highlights of your long career with NASA?
Well, I think one that I really enjoyed was the LDEF experiment. We had an experiment, or I had an experiment on there that I think it was referred to as Noah's Ark of
Tell us
materials.
a little bit about LDEF. I know of it, but I don't think anybody else in our interviews has mentioned it. This is a good thing to get on the record.
Well, it was a large frame that was put into space, about the size, as I say, of as a school bus, with experiments mounted on the exterior of it. And there were all sorts of experiments. I think there was something like 57 experiments, and it stayed in space for 6 years.
See, this was run out of
Langley,
was it?
Right. The Marshall Center had about 7 experiments, and there was it was put into space during the solar minimum and came out at a solar max point in time. So that told us a lot about the influence of sequence of environments on, particularly on materials. But that was just a marvelous experimental platform, and I think that's one of the things that I enjoy the most.
I think it was intended to recover it earlier.
Right.
And then because of schedule problems, it stayed up for a long time.
Right, and which was, in the long run, the best thing that could have happened to us. I mean, we thought for a while they'd never retrieve it, but I guess a lot of people got behind it, and that was the case. And another thing that I did a lot of environmental technology work for Bob Swinghammer, and I think we held 4 conferences at the Von Braun Center related to that, and the change out of materials and things like that. So that was pretty intensive activity also.
Oh, you are happy, I take it, with your career at NASA?
Oh, yes. I mean, I think I got to do a lot of things that people only think about doing. And, you know, meeting people and going places. It was just great.
Well, since you retired, what have you been doing?
Well, I just played around for about a year after I retired. But we have a farm on Sand Mountain, so I think I'm a part-time farmer at this point in life, and nobody told me that you're...
Gentlewoman farmer.
Right. Nobody told me it was so tough. But I also have a part-time job with one of the local industries, so
Right.
It works for me.
Any thoughts you would like to leave with the younger generation that's taking on some of the same problems that you fought with?
I'd say just be persistent and just hang in there and do the best you can, and you'll win out in the end.
So any final thoughts you'd like to put on the record on whatever topic?
Well, I'm sure I forgot to tell a lot of the interesting things, but I'm sure somebody else will pick up on it.
Well, if you think of interesting things to talk about later, we can
All right.
have a second round of the interview.
Okay, that sounds good. All right.
Well,
All
thank
right.
you very much for being here today, and
All right.
good to have you, and
Thank you.
hope we see you again.
All right.